it's now 5 after the hour, so we're going to get started. Thank you everyone so much for attending today, which I think is a very important topic for our society, maybe one of the most important in many years as we contemplate how we might address this issue of the name itself of the organization, an issue that has been recurring for decades. As many of you know, I see many former presidents in the crowd. I got an email from a past president from many years ago saying, since 1969, when they first joined, this has been an preeminent issue. So we're hoping in some ways that this will help bring some resolution and clarity for what our members intend to have from their society in order to make the society as impactful as it can be and as useful as it can be for our members. Before I jump into a more formal introduction of the topic and a little bit of the background, I want to briefly discuss today's agenda. Okay, so first we'll start out with just 5 or 10 minutes. I'll talk about some of the background of why we're doing this today. And then we're going to move on to Morgan, who is the chair of our ethics committee, and Lucas, who is the chair of our student committee. I don't think Ashley Glenn is here today, who's the chair of our DEI committee. But those folks were tasked early on in the process with describing, putting together a short report on if, how, when, why, and what we should do with this issue. And it is partly on their recommendations that we are proceeding, that the council charged them with putting together a plan of action for how we might address this issue in a more concrete way than perhaps we have in the past. And we'll have about 20 minutes of that presentation, give or take. We'll then move on to Irene, who's a current council member. As you may recall, in the past month or two, we had a survey go out that wasn't explicitly about the changing of the name or potential changing of the name, but just to gather information on who our members are and what they want out of the society. So she did a nice analysis of those data and will present that for us, and that will be about 10 minutes or more. We'll then have an open discussion, which is what this forum is all about. We have 20 minutes reserved just for broad general discussion. Whatever folks want to talk about, we're open to hearing what wants to be said. And then we'll move on to a discussion of the possible naming options. And you can suggest names, you can put them in the chat box, you can unmute and suggest names, and we'll talk about that process a bit more. Currently, we're thinking that the council will narrow those down to about 5 choices, and then we'll have a ranked choice vote for those. Those choices will include the current name of the society, which will allow members to continue to maintain the current name if the other choices are not acceptable. So the current name will be able to be ranked amongst any other choices. Then we'll spend 10 minutes briefly discussing, maybe reiterating some of the next steps, that we will keep an open line of communication at least until March 12th. So we give everyone who couldn't attend and others to submit suggestions, comments, etc. The council will discuss any logistics that need to be resolved, and then we'll hold a vote in the week of March 21st. And the question will be whether the name should change, and then a ranked choice vote of what that name might change to. And then we'll proceed with making those changes if that's what the membership decides to do. Great. So that's a brief description of the agenda. And now I'll just take a moment to reiterate some of the things that I said in the email itself to debut this conversation, just to get everyone on the same page a bit. I think that it's important to reiterate, and I've said this in a couple communications to membership, that our primary responsibility as a society is to the mission, and to remind everyone as we start this meeting that our mission is to foster and encourage scientific research, education, and related activities on the past, present, and future uses of plants and the relationship between plants and people, and to make the results of such research available to the scientific community and the general public through meetings and publications. And as you know, we've worked very hard, particularly the group in Jamaica. David Picking and Ina van der Broek have worked tirelessly for, it seems, 3 years or more now to make sure that we have a meeting. So we'll actually have a meeting in Jamaica, and I hope to see you all there. But that we do keep true to this primary mission of what we are supposed to do. And I think the council reflected this in the intentions of having this meeting and the vote that we'll have, in making sure that we continue to be as relevant and important to the community as possible. So that's part of the motivation of that. So I think that we have made this year and in past years a lot of great strides to modernize and open up the society, including some of the resolutions that we passed that give greater access to folks to being council members, and making sure that we give ample time to get nominations for volunteering to be council members or parts of the society in ways that maybe we haven't, increasing the number and types of awards that we give, and travel awards in particular, and focusing on developing and encouraging the organizations that are affiliated with SEB in other parts of the world, so that they actually have maybe a little bit of money and incentive to contribute to the society in ways that they haven't been able to in the past. So as I mentioned in the outset, at least since 1969, by the evidence I have from former presidents, but maybe even before that, and I'd love to hear perspectives from others, we know that there has been some contention around the name economic botany. Most recently, we had a vote in 2017 that was at our annual conference, or the results of which we talked about at our annual conference. It resulted in a vote where the majority of folks wanted to change the name, but there wasn't an agreement on what the name change would be. So but between that time and now, this wasn't really picked up and followed up on, but there still remains folks that think that this is an important issue. So we had a split vote about what actually the name should be, and mostly those choices were between the Society for Ethnobotany and the International Society for Ethnobotany. So with a ranked choice vote, we hope that this will eliminate this issue, which was the suggestion of the committees, the joint committees I mentioned earlier. And then there was a student survey taken in 2020, which showed a clear majority of students wanting to move away from the term economic botany and toward ethnobotany. So those are things we want to take into account from our membership, and it's why we're responding now. And we've heard throughout the years from folks that say that the term economic botany could be alienating or off-putting. It may not accurately represent our membership. These are things that we've seen in our survey results, and that through a lens of economy or economic botany, we might be accused of seeing the value of a forest only once it's been cut down. And these are things that I don't think ring true with our membership, and it's something we should keep in check. So as I mentioned, the council voted last year to put in place a process to settle this matter, in at least for some foreseeable part of our future. So as I mentioned, we asked the Ethics Committee, the Student Committee, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee to consider this issue, meet separately and decide what they might want to do, and then meet jointly and provide recommendations to the greater council about how we might move forward. Then the council voted in December to accept those recommendations of the joint group, and specifically, we decided that we would hold this members forum to discuss the proposed name change, and then we'll hold a ranked choice vote of the full membership on the name change in March. So this is the forum, and this is our opportunity to discuss that. As you may have seen when you joined, that this is being recorded. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to attend, remind them. I'm sure we'll be able to send out an email so everyone can view this program. And of course, we want to hear from folks that weren't able to be here. So we're keeping this open until at least March 12th. And then as I mentioned, in the week of March 21st, we'll have a ranked choice vote about if and how we might change that name. So that's a little bit of setting the agenda and the intention of this meeting. And the next point on our agenda is to pass it to Morgan, who, as I mentioned, was part of that three group meeting that came together and gave us some recommendations. So Morgan, if you'd like to take it from here, please do.
Great. Thank you so much, John, and thank you to everyone who's here. It's really great to see so many friends and new faces as well. I will share my screen. I have a few slides here. And really, I'm just going to review the process that brought us here in a little bit more detail, but John's already provided a really great overview. And this is the same information that I shared with the council earlier this year. Are you able to see my screen as projected?
Yes, it's you're not in presentation mode though.
Okay, let me switch over. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. So basically, the process that was established by the council was that the three committees, the student committee, the ethics committee, and the DEI committees would meet separately um, to discuss the potential name change. Um, the student committee, as Lukasz will talk about next, discussed this issue and voted to change the name to the Society for Ethnobotany. Um, and the ethics committee decided not to vote, seeing as we are not a representative body, we're not elected, we're appointed by the council. So we didn't feel it was in our power to make that recommendation. But we discussed the process that has led us to today in detail. Um, I should point out that the other members of the ethics committee are Eve Emschwiller, who I saw, William McClatchy, who may be here as well, and Aurora Pren, who I think is present as well. So we had a really good discussion about this. And then I met with the chairs of the student and the DEI subcommittee, and we discussed further, and we developed a short report, 2 pages, that included some recommendations. Um, the findings of that report were first what John's already said, that there are concerns throughout the society membership that the current name is not ideal for various reasons, and that warrants consideration of some change. Primarily that many, perhaps most members identify as ethnobotanists and not as economic botanists. And as John mentioned, the economic botany may have some negative implications for some members. And we didn't characterize what those may be, but we acknowledge that they exist. However, the ethics committee especially was concerned that not all members identify as ethnobotanists. And so we were particularly concerned that changing the name to Society of Ethnobotany would also exclude those who don't identify as ethnobotanists. And an effort to be as inclusive as possible may not, it may be ironic if we change it to another name that it excludes some of our current members. So our recommendations flow from that. We said that the process of making this decision really matters. Changing the name is, of course, a very important decision, and that we needed an opportunity to really listen and learn from each other. And there was consensus among the ethics committee members that business meetings are not the ideal forum for an in-depth discussion. We actually have we usually have many items to discuss, and it's hard to go into any one issue in depth. And also that those discussions are often led by senior members and leadership, and students and newer members may have a difficult time contributing. We also discussed that there may be other names than the two that were kind of being considered early in this process, the current name and then Society of Ethnobotany, that may be more inclusive. Something that combines both economic and ethnobotany, or something that is even more encompassing of folks who are engaged in this subject both through research and through practice, such as the Society for Plants and People, or People and Plants. And we also, as John said, reviewed the fact that the recent vote, and we thought it was in the early 2010s, but I guess it was in 2017, had resulted in that split. So we came up with 3 recommendations. The first being that we should organize this forum, which we're having today, and that we would invite all members to share their perspectives on the current or proposed names, that we should allow members to suggest additional names to be included on the ballot, and that's part of the goal today. And lastly, that we would use a ranked choice voting system for the name change, because this would allow us to avoid that situation that we had in 2017 with a split vote. I'm hoping, I know this has come up also in my department at Clark, and some folks are unfamiliar with how ranked choice voting works, or they may have some misunderstanding of that. And so I'm hoping I have a little GIF here that basically walks through the process. So voters select their top 3 picks. The first choice votes are counted first to see if there is a majority. And then the candidate, the option with the lowest number of votes, you can see that is eliminated. And then within that group, the eliminated candidates' first votes, those are redistributed to those supporters' second choices. So whoever they voted for second are reallocated. And in this example, you still don't have a majority, so you would actually have to eliminate also candidate C. So you would continue until you have one option that receives a majority. And this, I'm sure many of you know even more about this than me. This tends to be seen as being more democratic and capturing kind of the best option for the most members of a group. So I'm happy to answer questions about that, but I think we should probably move to Lukasz now. Is that the plan, John?
Yeah, the way the agenda is now, we were going to wait to have the open discussion till after everyone got a chance to present the information. But this is very important, and maybe if there's a question or two that's specifically about the technicalities of ranked choice voting, since you've worked with this, we could quickly open up if we have the time. Does anyone have any specific questions about ranked choice voting? Okay, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions, so we'll go to Lukasz.
Okay, can you hear me good?
Yes.
Okay, so hello everyone, Lukasz over here. I'm the current student representative to the society. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining this important discussion on the future name of the society. And thanks to Morgan for presenting this report, which we jointly developed with Morgan and Ashley, and for this very sophisticated voting methodology. And regarding this issue, let me mention that we held a meeting with the student committee on October 14, 2021, where we discussed the issue and voted about the name change. The meeting was attended by all 6 student committee members. So my thanks go to Ella Vordeman, Natalie Canales, Harriet Gendala, Brandon Dale, and Yubei for joining that meeting. I have seen also that Ella, Brandon, or maybe others are with us today. So prior to the voting, we first discussed the pros and cons of changing the name. We also reviewed the older survey that was conducted by the earlier Student Council in April 2020. And the results of that earlier survey showed that a higher proportion of students was up for changing the name. But back to our current student committee, in general, all the student committee members are aware of the historical importance of the name of the Society for Economic Botany and its linkages to the name of the journal Economic Botany or the Distinguished Economist Botanist Award, for example. So we are aware of these important connections, but most of the students felt that the current name does not adequately represent the contemporary field of ethnobotany, especially in the context of the need to decolonize science and economic commodification and exploitation of plant resources. In addition, we reflected that most of the students identify themselves as ethnobotanists, not economic botanists. And we felt that changing the name could refresh the interest in ethnobotany and open the society to a broader and more diverse membership. At the end of the discussion, we conducted the voting, and all the student committee members voted positively for changing the name of the society. So these are the brief key updates from my side, and I hope there will be some more space also for other students or young members to share their perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Lukasz, very much. I suppose if there's a student member from the council that does have something pressing they'd like to add to that, please feel free to do that now. If not, that's fine. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Morgan and Lukasz, for describing the process and how we got to this point now, at least in the past several months that we've been dealing with the issue. We're going to move now to Irene, who, as I mentioned, is a current council member and helped us put together and really led the effort on putting together the most recent survey that we held and then has analyzed the data for us. Irene.
Hey, hello everybody. Can you all see the presentation properly?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. So my name is Irene Toshido. I work as a postdoc at the University of Oslo, and I'm part of the council of the society. And I guess what I'm going to do now is just put some numbers to things that John and Morgan have said. So there is this realization that members of the society don't identify as economic botanists, but we don't know how many. We know it's a majority, and so there came this idea of looking a bit more closely into how members of the society define themselves. And so for that, we distributed a survey last month to collect a bit more data. And I would like to thank Amelia Neely for helping putting the survey together, distributing it, and getting the data, the raw data. So basically, I'm going to present results from two data sets here. One is the little question that we have in the membership form that everybody fills in when you start a membership or renew your membership, where you select which disciplines relate to you, and then the results from the survey that we distributed last month. And from that survey, there were other questions, but I'm just going to focus on main discipline, other disciplines that you use in your work, cross-disciplinary collaboration, your education, and the geographical areas where we work. And just to have an idea of the numbers or how representative this may be of the society, 1/5 of the members responded to the questionnaire. So it's not the majority, but it's a bit. And then regarding the membership form, around 400 out of the 500 members responded to that part of the form. So starting with that data, basically I counted the hits of each discipline. On the right, you see the total count. So if someone had clicked anthropology, conservation, and ethnobotany, those are 3 counts. But then I also wanted to know, well, if we take into account that people have selected many disciplines regarding people who only selected one, I did a balance count, which doesn't really change the results, but I just wanted to be sure of that. Basically, the most selected discipline is ethnobotany, followed by botany. And then we have conservation, anthropology, and ecology in the 3rd to 5th place in various orders, depending how you count. Starting with our education as a community, the most people said they were botanists or had a background in botany, followed by biology, anthropology, ethnobotany, etc. This may give the wrong impression that we're mostly a natural science bunch when I actually counted the disciplines that were in the natural or the social sciences, and it's about 50-50, which I think it's nice. When people were asked about what their main discipline is, the most people said ethnobotany, followed by botany, anthropology, ecology. So here we have sort of a corroboration that our membership form is very well designed because we're getting the same results. What I have to say also is that only 9 disciplines were mentioned by more than one member, and 46 disciplines were mentioned by only one respondent. So we're really, really diverse. Yeah. Asking for other disciplines that people mobilize in their work. Again, we see the prominence of ethnobotany, but closely or more closely followed by ecology, anthropology, botany, and then also archaeology, genetics, phytochemistry. Again, only 23 disciplines were mentioned by more than one respondent, and 66 only mentioned by one person. We're really, really diverse. This we already knew, but I just put some numbers behind it. About half of the people who filled the survey mentioned ethnobotany as their main or other or sort of secondary discipline that they mobilize themselves, whereas only 6 people mentioned economic botany as a main or other discipline. We collaborate across disciplines and also across the natural and social sciences. With chemists, again, anthropologists with botanists, botanists with anthropologists, I would suppose, people in geography, social sciences, linguistics, etc. And last but maybe not least, when asking about where people are based and where people work, we see that the society is prominently Western society. Most of us are based in the US or in Europe, although we work in the global south, in South America, Africa, and Asia mostly, but there are significantly little scholars, or at least the ones that replied to the questionnaire, who come from these areas, and this is perhaps something to have in the back of our minds. And I wonder if this could have something to do with the name or not, but in any case, I think it would be very nice if we could engage with scholars in these other areas more closely. And that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Irene. I think for everyone that was really enlightening, so I appreciate all the work you did putting that together. Okay, so at this point in our agenda, we want to have some open discussion, and of course that can and probably should include questions for all of us that have spoken so far, but we're really open to the thoughts of you, and we appreciate all you being here. So please feel free to, I think it may be best if you raise your virtual hand, if you go to reactions in the bottom right. I'm sure everyone has used Zoom a lot these days, but raise hand and then I'll acknowledge you, and then you can put your hand down. You can also type into the chat if you'd prefer that. So I do see Wendy's hand up, but I did see that there might have been a couple questions that came in first through the chat. I did see from Ina, and I guess this is for Irene. Perhaps this question was answered. How many people said they were economic botanists?
Sorry, I was typing in responding in written, but I think if I remember correctly, 3 people said mentioned economic botany as their first main discipline, and another 3 as a secondary or other disciplines that they mobilize.
Great, thank you so much. Wendy.
Thank you. That's a great presentation there, and thank you very much. And to you also, Morgan. I noticed that in the broader survey of disciplines from the membership questionnaire, when people are signing up for membership, we have a long list of alternatives we offer them. And economic botany is not one of those alternatives that we offer them, which seems a little strange for a Society for Economic Botany. And I think that what that reflects is that economic botany is not, in fact, a discipline. It's not a recognized discipline. It's an interdisciplinary field. There's no department of economic botany anywhere. If you do something that can be called economic botany, you are employed as a botanist or an anthropologist or an economist or a phytochemist or what have you. The fact that few people identify themselves as as economic botanists in this survey, I think reflects the fact that that's nobody's job title ever, basically. Regarding the name possibilities, I'm really glad to see that more inclusive names would be considered. At the time of the last vote, 2 people proposed Society for Economic Botany and Ethnobotany, and that was omitted from the choices because I think one of the involved parties really did not want to be inclusive of economic botany. And I think it would have been helpful to have that on the vote. But the alternative that is listed in Morgan's presentation of the Society for Economic and Ethnobotany is really ungrammatical. It is, economic is an adjective without a noun, and then ethnobotany is a noun. So that doesn't work. It would have to be economic botany and ethnobotany, or ethnobotany and economic botany, which I think scans better. And I hope that change will be made. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wendy. And just a note that we absolutely can talk about the specifics of the name. We do have some time reserved closer to the end of the meeting to specifically talk about what the names might be, but perfectly valid to talk about it now. And I took notes of what you said, and we'll be sure to include that. And I noted that as well previously. So thank you. Okay, Trish.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what Wendy said about economic botany as being an option. I don't think that is clear. And I'd love to ask students and others if they even understand what economic botany is, because we aren't very good at educating students on the broader range. I feel that economic botany, since we are so multidisciplinary, is the broad topic, of which all these other things come underneath. And so that's why economic botany to me is a very valid name. It doesn't mean the commodification of things. Yes, I work in both worlds, economic botany and ethnobotany, and it's always sometimes the benefit for the people. And if we can't help them in a right livelihood, then what are we doing with our careers? Are we just using them as something to study, but not assisting them in growing as we do? And so these are a couple questions I have. One, I don't think we define that. I don't think we educate students who are coming in what economic botany is, and I don't think it has been an option that we've asked. And two, oh, and one other thing, the last time we had a name discussion, we talked about keeping economic botany. It's a brand. It's what our society has been for decades. It's also what our journal is, and that can have a big impact. And so what we talked about was economic botany and then having a tagline that really emphasized ethnobotany. So it would be, and I don't remember what that was. At the time, it was a meeting Sunshine was running in Kentucky. And that's where we had a tagline name, and I didn't see that necessarily. So I popped in a little late. I apologize if I missed anything that Morgan presented, but those are my issues.
Thank you, Trish. Ina?
Hi, John, Trish, and everyone, and thank you for the great presentations. I think Trish touched upon a very important point, right? How we define economic botany. And that might be very different for Trish, for example, than it is for me. I mean, when I think of economic botany and the history of the discipline, where I go back to when I teach about it, I go to the colonial aspects of the field. So, I mean, this should also not be avoided in the discussion. You know, the social justice aspects of changing the name. Then when we were talking about the survey, I was really struck by the fact that only 6 people identified spontaneously as working in economic botany or being economic botanists. And I'm not sure that can be ascribed solely to us not educating people about the term. But I want to be a devil's advocate here and maybe throw in the group, does that not make the discussion mute, you know, of you know, upholding economic botany next to ethnobotany? There's almost no one self-identifying as an economic botanist. And then finally, one concern with the survey, and also maybe here with the discussion group, I quickly looked at the participant group. Again, there are a lot of senior people, people involved in the leadership, are longstanding members of our society. Are we really reaching, you know, the younger constituents? And definitely, if this is not the case, maybe that should be part of the vote name survey, because I'm especially interested in knowing what our students think, what members of local and indigenous communities think. And yeah, it's a long-standing discussion. I'll leave it there. There is so much to unpack. We probably could do weekly sort of psychoanalytical sessions about it. But anyway, I want to be a devil's advocate, throw things in the group. And over to you.
Thank you, Ina. And, you know, your last point, I think, is well taken. It's why this has been debated and talked about for decades. And we haven't had a clear resolution, I think, other than the fact that the name has just remained the same. And in some ways, we may have avoided grappling with it in a very direct way. I will say as well, there are approximately 500 current members of the society, and approximately 100 of those are students. That just for, you know, accounting. So I don't know, maybe we actually do have an accurate representation in today's cohort of people in this meeting, of percentage-wise of who's here. And I'm not sure about the survey. I don't know if we took that information about whether they're students or not. And the final thing that I'll say, that just as this may contribute to some thought, is we have procured in the last couple of months the URL www.ethnobotany.org. So in the case that there is a name change or not, we still have that which can direct traffic to our website. But just something to keep in mind that although branding, of course, is important and it will be something that we'll have to tackle if the name does change, there are some things that are already in place that will help with that. Irene?
Yes. Yeah, various things. One first comment, small comment for Trish. What struck me from the survey as well as and Ina as well, it's not only that only 6 people mentioned economic botany as their discipline, but also very few people, like really few, I can't remember, mentioned economics or anything to do with economics. So I don't know, to me, this kind of builds up again with all these other points of evidence that very few people identify with economic botany. Yeah, that the research is in economic botany. And Trish just said that economic botany is interdisciplinary, and that's why there's no institutes or departments. But I would say this, the same applies to ethnobotany. I mean, I know of one master program in Europe. I don't know what's the situation in the US, but there are no departments for ethnobotany. I think in France there's one. And also another thing that the survey sort of said is that around, at least from the people who replied to the survey, around 25% said they were ethnobotanists. The rest are not. So we're not a society of ethnobotanists, and I don't think we should aim to be a society of ethnobotanists. And what, to me, what the survey said is that we are really, really diverse, and our common interest is the relationships between people and plants, be it to promote or to study some economic values for development, etc., or something completely different. So to that point, and that's for the later discussion, I kind of like the name of a Society for Plants and People, or People and Plants, because that seems to be really what we do as a group. Yeah.
Thank you, Irene. Ernest?
Hi, can everybody hear me? Oh, good. I'm sorry that I can't join by video today, but this discussion brought something to my mind that I'd like to make a very brief point. As many of you know, I'm an attorney by trade, and I can think of many compelling arguments for why the Society of Economic Botany is a very comfortable umbrella term for me. But one thing that I've learned is that if I am to take diversity, equity, and inclusion seriously, I should often be well, it doesn't mean that I can't have a voice in the room, but I should often be the last person to speak rather than the first person to speak. So in listening to my students and in listening to many other people, members of the society, I think that we can't think about this decision in a vacuum. As we all know, there's nothing inherently wrong with the term economics. Throughout all of human history, all cultures, even indigenous cultures, have practiced some form of economics, but many of those economics have been mixed economies. But the historical trend over the past 100 years has been a monolithic definition of what the economy is and economics, which has been more exploitative than not. And I don't think that that should be ignored. So we're not judging I think this decision by what was in the minds of people 100 years ago, but what is in the minds of people today and what will best serve us in the next 100 years. So for me personally, I can sit very comfortably with the term economic botany. However, I don't think it's serving the broader mission of the organization in the way that it needs to. It's not only about me, it's about what other people feel when they hear that term and what our intentions are moving forward for the next 100 years. That's just my 2 cents. And I look forward to seeing many of you in Jamaica.
Great, thank you, Ernest. Mark?
Thank you, everybody. It was really great discussion. And I think we could maybe tease out two strands, if you like. One is around the kind of purpose and philosophy and ethical aspects of the term. And the other is a purely pragmatic one around how can people find and join the society. And it really struck me that at the Cincinnati welcoming party, I talked to a new member who says she would have joined years before if she had realized what economic botany was about, if she'd understood what the society did. So I look after an economic botany collection that many of you have been to, and the very first thing I have to do on every single tour is explain what economic botany is and explain how the meaning of economic has changed over the last 100 years, away from practical and useful. And actually this year, for the first time, despite the fact that we were the world's first museum of economic botany, I am now convinced that we should change the name of the collection for that purely pragmatic reason, alongside the more philosophical reasons that we're also talking about.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. And I know you've written extensively about this. I will say that in talking to the leadership at the New York Botanical Garden, they are also in the process of considering changing the name of the Institute for Economic Botany, which in many ways is our kind of parents, right? Our journal goes through that organization, and we've had for as long as there's been an Institute of Economic Botany, there's been the Society for Economic Botany. So they are in the process of changing their name in the same way Mark is. So that's why I think this discussion is just timely. Right? Thanks, Mark. Wendy.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really good point, and one that I find valuable and convincing. I do want to point out that economic botany generally doesn't have anything to do with the field of economics that you might publish in an economic journal. It could be phytochemistry, it could be looking at the potential medicinal value of some plants, or the nutritive value that you could gain by harvesting mushrooms from a forest or whatever. I'm doing a study on adulteration of Chinese medicines. Those things are economic botany, but they're not economics. So if the society's name changes, it changes, but I don't think we want to be derogatory to people who do things that are of use to humans, what some people call extraction or exploitation, other people call making a living, and that's going to be an important thing for an increasing number of us in future.
Thank you, Wendy. Bob? Good to see you.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. And I hope to see you all in Jamaica. We're looking forward to get there if we can ever. We just had an earthquake, so we're still trying to recover here this morning. A couple of points. One, a few of us knew some of the founding members of the Society for Economic Botany. And this discussion we're having was started since the 60s, so it's nothing new. But I think one of the important things here is the term economic. And I think Wendy and others have expressed this clearly, that it's not really economics. We're not agricultural economists and things of that sort. So I think one of the things we need to do is to look at the definition, which essentially what the society has used as the use and value of the plants by people. The other aspect, and this is something that Dave Rogers was very emphatic about in terms of the founding of the society, it's a society for economic botany, not of. And I think that's something we need to consider as well when we talk about the title. I'm speaking more, although I'm an American, I'm speaking more from the perspective of Latin America. Right now, one of our big projects here in Mexico, financed by GEF and by FAO, through the CONABIA, which is the National Commission on the Use and Knowledge of Biodiversity in Mexico, is a big national project on agrobiodiversity. And we have 4 components. One component is traditional knowledge of agricultural systems and conservation of genetic resources. The other is helping continue the traditional practices as well as capacity building. The third is public policy. How can we incorporate traditional farmers into national policy on agriculture, environment, and so forth? And the fourth one, which I was a little skeptic about at the beginning, was commerce. A fourth component is how can we include rural farmers in the economic systems, both at the local level as well as the national and international level, with fair pricing and quality control and all that kind of stuff. And there's a whole series of social theories that have been applied to this, and it extends all the way from what we call in Mexico treque, where one will exchange oranges for tortillas and things of that sort. And so I think we need to rethink the definition of economics and how we're using it, and realize that it's this monolithic concept of colonialism and so forth was part of the history of how people looked at uses of plants, but it has evolved and is moving forward. Another component that's very exciting here in Mexico and Latin America is what's called the Red Cial, the network Cial, which is basically focuses on local networking of medicinal and food plants between communities in avoiding long-term distribution and what you might call industrialized food. So I think there's a number of examples that would be useful to consider in other parts of the world that might help us broaden and look at in a more functional manner the term economic botany. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And I know, especially during your time as president, you were very instrumental in working with groups around the world to make sure that we had active representation in those groups. And we hope to revitalize that through some funding that we've allocated for those same groups, for instance, in Africa and others where they can submit proposals. And this will happen after the conference in Jamaica. We'll be issuing that. Brandon.
Hi, everyone. For those I haven't met, my name is Brandon Dale. I'm on the student board. And I think I want to keep my comments brief because I think people have highlighted a lot of this. But I think the one thing that I wanted to say was that as we've discussed the name change, I think thinking a lot about the future of the society in terms of who will be in the roles. As people have mentioned, there are people who have been in the society for 10 plus years. And I think really thinking about the next generation and who they see themselves as wanting to be identified as, and as they think about the name change, thinking about how we brand, not just for now and for what the society currently is, but what it could be and should be in the future, and sort of what the people who will be carrying the flame of it forward also want to sort of take in consideration. And so I think really just involving student perspective, I think is really important. I'm really happy that we have students on this call, but I think that should be very much so considered, because ultimately for anything to sort of sustain, it's got to have the interest of the people who are being raised in sort of the next generation. So I just want people to consider that. Thanks.
Thank you, Brandon, for highlighting that. I think that is, I'll say, you know, personally, I was a former student representative, and most of the people on this call, you know, have known me since I was a student, and there are others as well. I know Bob, you know, was an active student in the society, and so it's almost generational, and so it is good to have, and that's part of the reason why we had the three committees who considered what the next step should take had to include the student committee, who I think played an important role in that. So we appreciate all of you, and Brandon, you as well, for being part of that. Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Could I just introduce myself? I was born and raised in Jamaica, and unfortunately can't be there for the meeting, but I'm going there in 2 weeks' time. And one of the tragedies on the academic front, which is not just at the University of the West Indies, the Mona campus or anywhere else, is the dearth, not to say possibly death, of botany itself. And keeping the flag flying of botany seems to me a key part of your mission. I'm not a botanist, but my reason for talking is to try and keep the science side of the subject flag raised, as well as the broader anthropology issues. And I loved Irene's way of presenting the data with the names in proportion to the voting of the membership. But I wrote a book 30 years, oh, I should put my face up, I suppose, 30 years ago now on ethnic factors in health and disease. And although we touched on anthropological aspects, you'd be probably astonished that we had no anthropologists as such on the author list. So the breadth of the society seems to me as a newish member, its strength, but we need to have an umbrella term, which I'm not sure that ethnic actually meets adequately. If we can combine it with botany as a separate topic, I think it could work. Ethnobotany and the science of plants and for people, or something that's getting too long. But it's the breadth of the society that ethnobotany could be thought of as too anthropological in my analysis. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Kennedy, for sharing that wisdom and historical aspects. I appreciate that. Rosalina?
Hello. So I'm a fairly new member from New York City, the City University of New York, but I primarily work in Puerto Rico and other islands of the Caribbean. And the work that we've been doing in Puerto Rico more recently has been based around decolonization and the role that ethnobotany and agriculture and environmental, sustainability play in the process of decolonization. So for the people that I work with, economics, though it plays a role because Puerto Rico is heavily in debt and has, as you all know, has so many financial difficulties right now. None of the people that I work with would consider themselves, would focus on the economic aspect of this situation. They're more focused on reclaiming their cultural traditions, returning to agriculture as a way to continue to return to their ancestral roots, as a form of resistance in the movement toward decolonization. And so I'm just thinking that none of them would willingly come to the Society for Economic Botany because of that word economic. And I understand the history of it. Again, I'm a fairly new member, so I may not be familiar with all the history of it, but I do think that the word itself is a turnoff for a lot of people. And we have to consider that. We have to consider what the mission is moving forward.
Rosalina, thank you so much for bringing things back to the reality of the situation. And I think that that's really important for us to address. I don't see any other hands up. Would anyone else like to comment more broadly on the topic? Lots of really wonderful conversation, energetic conversation, we'll say. I think there's a paper that should come out of this chat, which I'll save it and we can use that. I think this would be a really interesting, something around this published in our journal would be really exciting. Alexandra, I see you put your hand up.
Great, thanks so much, John. I didn't want to chime in on the ethnobotany, economic botany discussion. I think we've weighed pretty heavily on that already, but I did want to bring up the point that we did come to two names, one that had the word international in it and one that did not. And based on the geographic spread that Irene had shared, and I know conversations we've been having on the council and the general consensus is that we do want to have this more international feel or presence or identity. And I personally am in favor of the international piece, but I know there was some pushback or some indecision around whether or not that would confuse us with other societies with similar names. But I wanted to bring up that discussion to see if there were any additional thoughts on whether or not the international piece is essential to our new name. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexandra. Actually, it's perfect timing because it's just about on the hour where we were going to move this discussion a little bit, especially since hands are not flying as much as they were, toward what should the options be that we might consider as we look at the ranked choices. So certainly, we're taking notes on all this discussion, but I think that absolutely that is something that we would want to consider adding to the list of choices, is putting international in front of the name with a change. so I want to open up the conversation more broadly to now, or I'm sorry, more specifically now to what the name options might be. And we're open to any and all suggestions. You can put them in the chat. Please raise your hand and we can discuss what those options might be. And anyone would like to kick us off, please raise your hand and we'll start.
Hey, John, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm on my phone.
Okay.
But I'm wondering,
No
are we, I'm sorry, I'm at MYVG right now. It's loud outside. The question I have is, are we 100% determined on changing the name? I mean, why haven't we been considering using a tagline to better define what economic botany is? I mean, this is no light matter to change the history of a society with a full name change. I mean, I'm personally strongly against the name change. I think we should think about how to educate people about what the society is about, and a tagline could help us get there. I don't think changing our identity is the right way. That's my opinion. I just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Cassie. Did you miss the first half of this meeting?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so you missed you missed everything, but happy to have your opinion there. Yeah, so this isn't being taken lightly, and I don't think that anyone on this call would characterize it that way. I think we're taking this very seriously, and we have a very deliberative process, and we recognize that this has been decades in conversation, and that we need to resolve this one way or another. So that's really the motivation for this. And there has been, I believe it was Trish brought up the possibility of bringing up of having a tagline, but at this point we will have a ranked choice vote for what the name might change to, and it will include the current name of the society. So if none of these options are sufficient, members can vote for the current name and it will remain that name.
But can you also specify with an option that we could have the current name with an explicit tagline added as maybe an additional option? Because those are two very different choices of just keeping the same name versus keeping the same name and adding the tagline.
So it could be possible that we could have, so there's two issues here. I think that one, that could be a separate vote. So if it fails, if people want to keep Society for Economic Botany, then we could have a separate vote, especially because it seems like there will be significant support for some sort of name change. But if for some reason Society for Economic Botany remains, then we should probably have a follow-up vote to think if we want to add a tagline to that name. It could be that we could consider a name, although we'd have to choose one, right? So it could be, we could offer as one of the options, Society for Economic Botany, whatever that tagline is. But I think that's something that we could easily do without having, because that isn't necessarily changing the fundamental name of the society. So in my mind, and I'm open to other thoughts, but that would be a separate thing that we would consider after this vote.
I disagree, because like I would be more in favor of something with a tagline, because the nuance matters. The nuance really matters here.
In that case,
those are two very different things.
In that case, you would be someone who would probably vote to keep the current name, because that is what you're advocating. And then we would, do you have a specific suggestion for what you think the tagline should be? Because we can add that as a potential option.
I know that Bob By just put up that in the 1960s there was something called Plants and Human Affairs. It was the former tagline. I don't have a suggestion for the formal tagline, but I think that should be something that we consider. If you're going to just give people lists of name changes, we should have leaving everything as it is the same, and then maybe also let them put forward a tagline that they could vote on with Society for Economic Botany as an option for the name change. That's my point. I'll stop talking because I know others have.
Okay.
I'm sure lots.
So what was the tagline that was decided in Kentucky when this discussion, I thought, was completed? Does anyone have that?
No, but we're several years after that, so we're open to hearing what the.
I understand, but
yeah.
that was a decision at the time, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't recall a specific tagline for. You're talking about the meeting in Kentucky? I don't recall a specific tagline from them. Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. If there's a specific name that someone has in mind for let's say that one of the options in the ranked vote could be Society for Economic Botany : whatever someone might propose. Happy to consider that, of course, as an option. I think that although what I said is another option, if the name is to remain Society for Economic Botany, I think we should have some discussion and perhaps a vote of whether we want to add a tagline to the name. Oh, Irene, I'm sorry, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, no worries. So just to comment first on this thing about the tag and how to go about it. I was just wondering, how about, first vote on 3 options: change the name by adding a tagline, or completely change the name, start there. And then if overwhelmingly people want to completely change the name, then you go for that. I don't know, just an option. And then I guess the original question was about what name would you like? And I think I already mentioned that I kind of like Society for People and Plants, because as many of us identify as ethnobotanists, but many of people in the society don't. But I think what we have in common is really this interest between people and plants, or studying people and plant relations, be it their uses or other kinds of relations. And I'm also thinking about students that currently are with us, for example, an archaeologist. She's an archaeologist, there's no doubt she's an archaeologist, but she studies people and plant relations just in the past and through archaeological sort of tools. But her work is still really relevant to the Journal of Economic Botany, and I think the society as well. So I don't know, I kind of like the more broad names that are not sort of trying to define a discipline, because we don't fall all in the same discipline anyway. So yeah, I think it's nice that it's really open. Yeah, that's my take.
Thank you, Irene. And I wrote down your suggestion. I think that's probably a good possibility. I'd love to hear others' thoughts, but the option of change the name of the tagline, or don't change the name. Before I go to Wendy, Morgan, I have a quick question. We'll be able to do that in the vote, right? I guess that wouldn't be too difficult to do, right? We have a preliminary question and then a ranked choice afterwards.
Yeah, there are various reasons why a 2-stage voting like that can lead to kind of strange outcomes, because people don't know which change they're voting for in the first stage. Anyone who lives in California knows that can have strange consequences. So I think most kind of democratic processes advocate for a single ranked choice vote, not a should we change and then which option should we change to. But
so great, thank you for that. So perhaps one of the ranked choices possibilities is Society for Economic Botany, and then with a tagline to be determined. Does that seem acceptable? And then we'll have to have a separate vote later to decide what that might be, if that's what wins. Morgan, does that sound?
Yeah, you could have the current name without a tagline. It would just need to be clear that that there are 2 different options. That one is the current name as it is, and one is the current name to be modified by a tagline. And you could put in TBD or a tagline if someone has one to suggest.
Perfect, thanks, Morgan. Wendy.
I concur that asking more than one question is asking for trouble. I run the Committee for Vascular Plants, and on ballots there I discovered that if you asked people at the same time, do you support making a decision on this request? And second, if we choose to make a decision, would you support X decision? The people who say, no, I don't support making a decision, generally then do not answer the second question. They don't understand that they still need to answer that question, and therefore their voices don't get heard. And this is particularly the case with people who are not native speakers of English. I think there are some languages in which the structure of this doesn't seem to scan well. And so we could be shutting out the views of our foreign colleagues by making it confusing in that way.
Great points. Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. So it sounds like there may be, we'll discuss this, but maybe some consensus on having one ranked choice and make sure that we include the possibilities we need to in those ranked choices. Kennedy.
Thanks again. Could I just get a feel from you, Mr. President, and everyone perhaps, whether the scientific basis of the botanical side of people's uses of plants is, you feel, a key part of the society. Because keeping botany in the title, even if you were to drop this word economic, it seems to me an important point that I made earlier. And Ina's earlier point was well taken. It's about people's, and it's come up in the chat a lot, about people's uses of plants. And of course, the use of plants, and then their scientific, and then clarifying what it is in those plants that does benefit, is a key part of the issue, I would have thought.
Great, thank you, Kennedy. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I mean, of course, there are, I wonder, I don't know if Heather is still on the call, but, you know, the Botanical Society of America is, you know, there still are societies that maintain botany as an essential part of their name, even though there aren't departments of botany as there used to be several decades ago. I think botany is probably one of the most binding pieces of what we do, because if there's one thing we might converge on, it might be that the accurate identification of a species of plant. So perhaps botany is important, but I'm happy to hear what others have to say. Robbie, I see your hand is up.
Thanks. Unhelpfully, I don't have a name suggestion, but I wonder if the word livelihoods reflects the qualities that people see in economic that are important to what we do, without some of the accrued baggage of the word economic.
Great, thank you. Eve, I see you've put a lot in the chat, and I appreciate that. I don't know if you wanted to say anything in addition to that, no, not to put you on the spot. But I do see Heather's hand is up.
Oh, I do. I think I put most of this. I think I put most of what I had in to say in the chat. I start my classes talking about the definitions in ethnobotany, finding all kinds of definitions of ethnobotany on the internet who talk about it being the study of primitive people, and you know, using bad, what I would say, unacceptable language like that, and limiting it to indigenous people or things like that. And so we have a discussion about the definition of ethnobotany. When I start my other class that's plants and humans, I didn't choose the title. I prefer plants and people. In that one, I talk about how the discipline of economic botany, if I go in my backyard and pull a dandelion and bring it in and cook it and eat it, that's part of my household economy. So the word economic doesn't have to mean about money. And so if you look at old textbooks or even newer textbooks in economic botany, it's about how people use plants, and it's not necessarily about making money off of plants. I guess that's, and so I have heard people speak up. Maybe they didn't respond to the you know, people who work on, say, natural products chemistry or something like that, who might identify more as economic botanists than ethnobotanists. And I don't know if they were among the few people who responded to the poll. Maybe they weren't, but I know there are at least some members who do identify more as economic botanists. So I would just say the Society of Ethnobotany and Economic Botany is what appeals to me most at the moment, but I'm finding this really useful. Yeah, okay, so Anne has a definition of economics. I'm not quite sure what people mean when they were calling it economic botany over the past 100 years. Yeah. Anyway, I've said most of what I wanted to say in the chat.
Great, thank you, Eve. I really appreciate that perspective. And Heather.
I'll just respond to your question, John, about botany and how the Botanical Society of America deals with that word. We actually had a big effort back in 2014, 2015, after a strategic planning session about reviving and revitalizing the word botany and botanist. And if any of you might have seen that on social media at the time, there was a "I am a botanist" hashtag, but it was not just about saying I am a botanist, it was also about showcasing the diversity of what it means to be a botanist. So I'm thinking of that in terms of this discussion. It was really lovely to be able to see all the different people saying, I am a botanist and I study and do this. I mean, like the breadth of what people were doing who were involved in BSA. And that kind of echoes back to the survey results from SEB here, where Irene noted the diversity of what people were saying that they study and they do. So while many people with SEB seem to kind of coalesce around this ethnobotany term, there was so much diversity in the profession. So I've got no dog in the fight here on what you call your society, but I do think that no matter what you do, you're going to have some kind of branding effort that communicates who you are as a society, and that is a diverse group of people and what you're doing. So I think maybe the organization could benefit from that, no matter where you land on what the name of the society is. I think we can do a better job of communicating what it is that this society does and what its members do.
Thank you, Heather. And I was able to get the membership numbers, and I know we're in the middle of a membership drive to get people to renew, but the trend is very clear. The numbers of the society have been on a steady decline for at least a decade, and I'm assuming more than that. But in the time that I've seen the numbers, it's been at least 10 or 15 years. And I know even going back to when Bob was president, we talked about this as well, but we're at about 500 members, right? So the community that we're talking about of people that, there's a community of folks that are not members that we want to attract to a society that are doing the work that we do and we think is important. So whether we call ourselves economic botanists or economic botany or ethnobotany will be important for the future when we're long gone, and who will be taking the roles that will lead the society and the work that we do. More generally, if you remember, I started the meeting with talking about the mission of the society, and that's really what this is about, is making sure that we hold true to what that mission is. And that may mean making a hard choice, like changing something that has been around for 60 years. So it is a grave and important decision, and I hope that we are considering what the future will be when, as the students are on this call, will replace us in our roles. Ina, I see your hand is up.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the great discussion. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing a lot of people saying what the term means for them personally, and that we then need to better educate people. But I also want to keep bringing into the conversation that it's not only about how we see it, but the history of the field and how we can disentangle that from the name that we currently have. And then, listening to the younger generation. I know wherever I go, I'm not going to say I'm an economic botanist, but that does not mean that I am interested in economic aspects or that I'm perpetuating these historical economic imperialist pursuits. I just identify as an ethnobotanist or as a scientist who studies people, plants, and the environment relationships. Over to you.
Thank you, Ina. And just for everyone here, Ina is our editor-in-chief of the journal Economic Botany, so that it does take a particular perspective, which I think is important. Rosalina.
Yeah, hi. So just 2 points that I wanted to respond to, and a few people have talked about educating. So let's educate people about economic botany. Now, how are you going to educate them if you can't get them to come to economic botany because they're turned off by the name? So that doesn't make any sense. You have to first attract them, get them in the society before you can educate them. That's number one. Number two has to do with that. I keep hearing about the history, and of course, I'm a new member, so I don't know much about the history. But what is the history in terms of diversity? I'm just curious about that because I see a lot of. I'm sorry, but as a Latina, I look around at the faces that I do see, and they all look pretty much the same. So is part of the mission to increase diversity? And if so, then maybe you have to let some of that history go and look toward the future. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalina. If I could remain not neutral for a moment, I would applaud your remarks. I deeply appreciate that, and I deeply appreciate you being here. So thank you. Trish.
Does someone want to answer her question though before I divert? Because I think that is really important and hasn't been really part of this conversation. I know we have it. I don't know if Morgan can answer that as you know, part of in this reporting with DEI and ethics, etc. So,
well, I mean, I don't think that maybe I should necessarily answer, but there are people here who have been part of the society for much longer than I have, you included, Trish. So, I mean, you could address, I think, some of what you have seen in terms of diversity in the society, but certainly Bob, who's been president and DEB and, you know, deeply within the society for a long time, I would love to hear those perspectives and anyone else on the call as well. Bob, I see you unmuted. Would you like to?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if I should let my student Trish Flaster go first, or ladies first, or no. I think the question is very pertinent, and it's hard for me to say that I was a member since last century, but it's and I knew most of the people who were founding members. The society at the beginning, when I first went to the meeting in Chicago, there were a lot of people in phytochemistry, medicinal plants, a lot of people in the USDA, a lot of plant breeders, and very few botanists. And when you talked about, when we had the discussion in what is the difference between ethnobotany and economic botany, in fact, at the preface to my doctoral thesis, I put that in, and my committee made me take it out, mainly because my advisor, Richard Evans Schultes, his definition was ethnobotany is the study of primitive cultures. And so that was not my view at all. In fact, Will Van Asdale, the first editor of the Journal of Ethnobiology, had a whole series on ethnobotany of us. And so I think since the 60s, there's been this movement within the society to become diverse, and I think that ever since the beginning of the society, if we talk about gender, Julia Morton was one of the motors of the society, and what a tremendous person she was. And she was, I think, one of the leaders of the feminist movement within science in general. Within the society, we had a lot of discussion about should we be national and international. Of course, we went international, and although I'm not Latino, Mexico has hosted twice the society meetings, and so there's always been this push to be international, to be diverse in various contexts, and in terms of the disciplines that we have. I think the discussion, I hear a number of people saying, is economic botany really a discipline? And I sort of view economic botany more as an umbrella under which we can all gather and talk about certain lines of interest in terms of what are the plants, including fungi, although that's technically, now they're even dividing the fungi into different phyla these days, but the plants in a general term, and their importance to people in various contexts. And yes, colonialism, imperialism was part of economic botany in a broader sense, but also one of the papers I'm working on now is even looking at taxonomy and floristics of plants in North America, and that was based upon the bellic relationship between the United States and Mexico, when great strides were made in botanical sciences. So there is always this history, but I think we younger people who were very active as students, and we continue to be active, are very inclusive of who participates in the society, and we are all trained in different techniques, different philosophies, different time periods. Archaeology is turning to be a very spectacular area for answering a number of questions that we have, and we're mixing that up and connecting it with, for instance, with molecular work these days. So I think we have to reflect that the society has great diversity in various perspectives that we have, and we have to maintain that. So.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that historical perspective. It's so valuable. I wonder if Rosalina is really talking, about maybe even a different type of diversity. And if we're talking about racial, ethnic diversity, I will be the first to say that we have largely failed at doing that. And we have tried and we have failed in some ways. In some ways we have not tried and we have not done the work that needs to be done. And it does need to be active and it does need to be work. And changing the name is not going to fix that, right? But I think that in the same way that pulling down a statue that is a symbol of something to many people is a symbol, there are some in our society that see that in a similar way, and we need to respect that perspective at least. So I hope that we're taking into perspectives not just the historical, not just what the folks that are current members, but what we want the society to be in the future. I just want to say we only have 4 minutes left, and we do need to end at 1:30. Trish, I did call on you and you didn't get a chance to speak. So if you had something to say, I do see Ella has her hand up as well.
What I wanted to say is that as someone who works in the natural products, it is an area that is not included. There are so much research going on medicinal plants and so many jobs available. And that is something for students to consider, to look at that whole aspect of economic botany, not as an area of suppression of diversity and abuse to knowledge, but a way to take that intellectual property knowledge and be able to apply it with skill to share with those who are providing those knowledge holders that are providing it. So I just want to mention that because we have not been successful there. There's a huge amount of money there that could come to research, to students, to supporting a lot of aspects of our meeting. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Trish. And I don't see any reason why we can't continue to do that work. And I wrote a letter to specifically appeal to those groups to include us in their funding decisions, and I hope that is something we can absolutely pursue whether we wind up changing the name or not. Ella, I see your hand up, and Ella is our incoming student representative for context.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. My connection's been a little bit off, but I do, I feel like I want to echo a lot of what Brandon and Rosalina and some of the younger members have said. Is, talking to the younger generations, I just before this meeting, I was explaining to the undergraduate that I mentor, I have to go on this call and what's what we're talking about. And she's planning on going to the meeting in Jamaica this summer. And she's like, why is the society even called the Society for Economic Botany? It doesn't make sense to me. And so I feel like, I work a lot with undergrads. I'm about to go teach a class. And I feel like when I talk to the younger generations, the name doesn't sit well with them, just in general because of the colonial aspect. And I think, increasingly so, students feel really uncomfortable with that. That's what I've gotten from just talking to other people. But then also I know that there's been a lot of discussion about how to educate people about economic botany, but I do think that there is this barrier. And so I do think, just as we think about where the name should go, as the next generation, I think that that there does need to be a name change, just as it doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of the younger scientists coming into this field.
Thank you so much, Ella. And as we're closing this meeting, I just want to, of course, we want to honor and make sure we understand the history for better or worse of the society and the work that's been done by the researchers. And we end with Ella, and we have heard from Brandon and Lukasz and Rosalina and others that will be the future presidents, council members, representatives of what the society will be. And I hope that we can reconcile those two things as we move forward. And I ask you please to send us additional suggestions for the names, and we will include those as we decide on the act for what will be in the ranked choices. And we look forward to doing that. It's 1/2 the hour now, so we're going to have to end the meeting, but this was a wonderful discussion and I really appreciate all of your time and contributions. If anyone has a last word, I see some people, I see Bob, you unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to say? Oh, you muted yourself again. No, you're good. Okay, well, great. Okay, thanks everyone so much, and please stay in touch. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, and see you all in Jamaica.
Yes, see you all in Jamaica.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you. Hope to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.